What is fast? In a world where 500 horsepower is apparently slow according to the kids on TikTok,
Is it the new M4 will hold 700 horsepower?
you'd think anything less might as well be your sister's Suzuki Swift. But that couldn't be anything further from the truth. What if I told you what defines fast isn't a number? It isn't even something you can measure. It's something that you feel. Yeah, alright, I know, I am getting a bit out there. Fast does have a definition, and depending on the context, it also would have a number. For example, doing 80 in a 50 zone is considered fast, as well as 4 demerit points and a $2,200 fine. But I'm sure you've all heard people at some point say, there's nothing quite like driving a slow car fast. And that brings us to Initial D. I've been meaning to watch Initial D for the longest time. I mean, who would have thought the guy that makes a lot of mecha videos on YouTube is actually also a car guy. I even went on a full driving experience in Japan back in 2020 where I got to screw around at an R32 GTR for like 6 hours. And I could not recommend doing that enough. And if you do go, definitely also go for the 6-hour option minimum because trust me, time flies when you're having fun. Oh, and before you ask me in the comments, it's called Fun to Drive, and no, this isn't sponsored. Have you seen my subscribe account? But back to the realm of anime, the last place I thought I would start my Initial D journey was on TikTok. That's right, all thanks to user Unloved illegally uploading episodes in multiple parts like 2010 YouTube, I've finally started my Initial D journey. Takumi Fujiwara is a pretty regular high school student who delivers tofu for his widowed father. He's been driving the Akina Pass most early mornings since the 7th grade to do so. Over the years, he finds himself learning this road like the back of his hand due to him driving this route so often. Wanting to finish the chore of his deliveries sooner, he gets faster and faster at that route, all so he can get back to his simple school life with no real direction. There's a girl he likes and has a bit of a path with, Natsuki. He also has some friends from his part-time job at a gas station, one of which being his classmate Itsuki, who is really into cars. But nothing really excited this young man. Nothing really even drove him to move forward. He's not into cars like his friend Itsuki. He doesn't get the appeal. Even when going out to the Akina Pass one night with a bunch of his buddies, he asks why everyone gets so excited about a street race. As it stands, Takumi has no real vices. He's just going through the motions and existing. Like an NPC, if you will. This is all very important information and shapes the story as a whole, as well as Takumi's character development up until the end of stage 3, at which point, unfortunately, I lost a lot of interest in the series. Don't get me wrong, the races are still pretty cool, and I do love seeing a bunch of other cars get their time in the spotlight, but something changes throughout stage 4, and I'm not the first one to notice. But we've got a little while before we get to that point, so let's reminisce on the good parts, shall we? Starting with the glorious setting of 90s Japan, roughly. Unfortunately, there's no clear start date on where the story is set, as we do have some conflicting cars that shouldn't exist if the story took place in like 1999-ish when we think, but fuck it, we aren't here to discuss semantics anyway. What I find really interesting is how nostalgic this time period feels, which is especially interesting when it's a time and car scene I never experienced. I was born in 99 and grew up around the sex spec era of cars here in Australia.
I'm soft, the car makes me hard.
Alongside the Fast and the Furious movies and Need for Speed Underground games. But at that point, I was far too young to really care for or appreciate cars in the way I do now. I'm old enough to still remember seeing cars in magazines and taking a peek through to see the big fold outs or read some of the articles on some of the cool cars in there. And I also had 2 older step siblings who happened to also be into cars, so I would find myself occasionally at meets here and there. But overall, I was far too young to experience and appreciate the early 2000s car scene. Yet here I am in 2023 yearning for this social media free experience out on a mountain pass fucking around with some buddies. It must have been a pretty great time, and shows like Initial D make it look like a pretty great time. But why do I, or maybe even you, feel this way? Why are we nostalgic for a time we never even experienced? Anemoia. Going off this article written by Dr. Christian Jarrett, Professor Felipe de Brigard from the Duke University theorizes that nostalgia is far broader than first thought, and includes your yearnings rather than just the traditional homesick feel it's based on, thus leaning into the field of anemoia. When recalling your memories, it's not like you're looking up a recording of what happened. It's more along the lines of your brain creating its own interpretation of those past events. In this way, de Brigard argues that while nostalgia can be based on memories, it doesn't have to be. Given the role of imagination in memory, he says it's not a huge leap to propose that nostalgia can also be based on imagined positive past experiences. This kind of imagination-based nostalgia is likely to be influenced by stories about the past. So in this instance, your Fast and the Furious movies, Need for Speed games, and Initial D anime. Then, based on those accounts, your mind creates a simulation of what those places or times would have been like, and you then feel a yearning to experience them for yourself. De Brigard goes on to say you're more likely to feel this way if you're feeling dissatisfied with your current situation, which I can relate to an extent. Don't get me wrong, I'm not dissatisfied with my life in any way. I'm actually in a pretty good place right about now, but I could say I'm kind of dissatisfied with the car scene as a whole these days. Even things as simple as the recent uprising in car spotting have really put a damper on things. Now, don't get me wrong, I get people wanting to appreciate some nice cars when they see them out in the wild and maybe snap a pic or two to share it with their mates. Like, you know for sure I would whip out my phone to take a couple pictures if I saw an LFA or an M5 CS just out in the street, because these aren't cars you see every day. And I appreciate that car spotting has kind of always been a thing, but some people are getting way too comfortable lately. I don't know if it's just the age of the internet and people getting a lot more parasocial, but you gotta remember, just because you follow a guy with a nice car on Instagram doesn't mean you know them and are mates with them. I've heard stories of kids stalking people's Instagram stories and then basically heading out in droves, harassing these people with nice cars just to try and record it and get a little bit of TikTok clout. And I don't know, man, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. And is why you should never post an Instagram story of where you are at the time. Just wait until you leave that place, and then you can post that story. People don't suddenly stalk you. I'm really trying my best here not to sound like a jaded old man yelling at a cloud. Like, I'm only 24, yet here I am craving a time where people hung out and appreciated cool cars without everything being done for the validation of people on the internet. This weirdly extends to concerts in its own way as well, with that whole meme of, wow, not a phone in sight, everybody just living in the moment. Compared to what we see nowadays, the scene in Initial D just seems so refreshing. Obviously, I am looking through some seriously rose-tinted glasses, but I almost miss a time back when everything wasn't being recorded, which is kind of part of the reason I've stopped doing videography. None of you would know this, but a while back I did used to make a little bit of car content here and there. And while a lot of it is pretty amateur at best, and I could probably do 10 times better nowadays, I don't really have the drive to get out and do that anymore. Plus, I'm older and super busy, so that doesn't really help either. I still appreciate the art form though, and there are so many people out there doing far better work than I ever could. Like, for example, Dated and Hard Up Media here in Australia alone. They managed to tell these mini stories with their work, and I mean, the production quality and the editing is just insane. But there is a pretty big key difference with these guys recording. A majority of these videos are planned and private shoots, usually with one or a couple cars at most, and the vibes are, to put it simply, immaculate. Whereas videos of car meets, which to be fair can still be produced amazingly by the likes of these guys, just miss that more personal and grounded vibe you get from a single car shoot. Plus, if you aren't at a car meet, you don't have to deal with 100 motherfuckers whipping their phone out to get a quick recording of a car the second they hear a loud exhaust come by. These fuckers are so lightning fast with their hands, you'd think they'd be able to make a girl come, but street racers don't need girlfriends. Am I right, kings? To round off this tangent, I've got a perfect example. My R32 tour around Mount Fuji I mentioned just a little bit earlier. There are a lot of rules going into this, and some of the big ones are don't be an idiot, this isn't Initial D, and no filming. Part of the reason for that last rule is because sometimes in some places you get to have a little fun. Completely within the law, of course, and filming that may become a bit of a problem for the company. Plus, some silly people would be more inclined to do even sillier things if their passenger happened to be recording. So all I've got from that experience is a couple of photos like this one, and my memories driving around Fuji with my now wife. Plus a whole bunch of film, because I was going through a bit of a film photography phase at that point. But despite having no video evidence of any of the things I'd done in that GTR, it was still one of the best experiences in my life and a memory I hold dear. I remember on that day, I even got talking with a couple of other people in the group, and who would have thought, all the way up on a random mountain pass on the way to Fuji, on the cusp of a global pandemic, mind you, I met some other guys from Sydney, Australia, who only lived like 15 minutes from where I lived at that time. Now that I think about it, that whole mountain driving experience could be part of the reason Initial D feels so nostalgic to me, but everything else I said plays a huge part as well. Anyway, it's time for me to stop being a pretentious little fuck about video and get into things outside of the aesthetic of Initial D that make it so damn great. But I do want to come back to Anemoia later. By chance, one morning before dawn when Takumi's on the way back home from his tofu run, not sponsored, in his father's 8.6, he flies past the Red Sun's Keisuke Takahashi. And Keisuke is absolutely awestruck at the fact he cannot keep up in his FD RX-7. After all, that's just an 8.6. Embarrassed at his shortcomings, Keisuke is out for blood. So he challenges the Akina Pass's main racing team, the Speed Stars, to a downhill battle, in the hopes he'll see that 8.6 again. Luckily enough for Keisuke, Bunta, Takumi's father, convinces his bored NPC son to take the 8.6 out to the pass that night, promising if he wins, he'll fill up the car with a full tank of gas. Takumi takes him up on that offer so he can take Natsuki out on a nice beach date, and he goes to the pass, meets up with everyone, and he wins. Effortlessly. Thus starting the rumour of Akina's 8.6, the one who put an end to the Red Sun's racing team's winning streak. From that point on, everyone wants a piece of Takumi, but it's not like he was ever interested in racing to begin with. Nonetheless, in part due to peer pressure and in part due to his own pride, he does continue to race, with each battle progressively getting harder and continuing to challenge him as a driver. He goes up against Takeshi in his R32 GTR with the unforgettable backing soundtrack, and I can confirm driving the R32 GTR, it makes that sound when you drive it in Japan, 100%. Second you put your foot on the gas, you'll hear it, believe me, try it for yourself. In this race is also the first time that Takumi starts to get a bit of an inkling that racing can be fun, as he's racing a car like he's never experienced before. It's a four-wheel drive that can tackle corners like he's never seen. But just like in the first race, he's cool, calm, and collected. And in the end, Takeshi's cockiness paired with the pressure Takumi puts on gets the better of him, sending his GTR oversteering into a guardrail, leaving Takumi victorious. But not exactly satisfied. His friends and even he himself start to realize he's winning a lot of these races because of how good he is and how fast he is on Akina Pass, not in general. At this point, he's never really raced anywhere else, so it's really up to interpretation on how he'd actually do on another course. In other news, soon after Takumi's victory, his mate Itsuki is so inspired he goes out and buys his very own 8.6, only for him to have been duped, bamboozled even. Or more accurately, he unknowingly bought an older and much slower single overhead cam Toyota 8.5. A relatively easy mistake for a kid to make, as the body shape is very similar, if not identical. All his mates at the gas station have a laugh and take a stab at him, except one. Takumi. To him, it's still a cool car, and the fact that it's actually Itsuki's car is even cooler. The 8.6 he drives is technically just his dad's car that he borrows most days, so having a personal car just seems cool to him. The two take the night off and head up to the Akina Pass in Itsuki's 8.5, where they're confronted by some out-of-town street racers looking for the 8.6 that defeated the R32 GTR. They act oblivious, but Takumi suddenly gets serious when one of these street punks disrespects Itsuki's car. He asks Itsuki if he can drive the 8.5, and when he does, he shows him exactly what each and every one of those 85 horsepowers can do on the downhill, scaring the hell out of Itsuki himself, not knowing his car was capable of anything like that, and absolutely embarrassing the street racers. But for someone who knows nothing about cars, Takumi can feel the difference between his 8.6 that's been tuned by his father and this stock standard slower 8.5. He comments on how the 8.5 won't accelerate downhill as fast as he wants, as well as how crap the tires feel, thinking to himself how slow this run of the downhill is. Whereas comparatively, Itsuki and the street racers both think he is going insanely fast. Which leads me conveniently back to my original point for a second. What is fast? To Itsuki, doing 130 on the downhill and tackling corners at 100 is fast. And I'd consider that fast too, considering how sharp a lot of the corners look on the Akina Pass. But Takumi felt it was slow. His frame of reference is the 8.6, which is a whole different ball game. What's interesting though is the aftermath. When the two are chilling in the parking lot at the bottom of the pass, having a vending machine coffee, as you do in Japan, Itsuki mentions how he has a newfound appreciation for his 8.5 after seeing it driven like that. He realized getting that thrill from driving isn't all on the car's capabilities. A lot of it's on the drivers. Seeing his arguably slow car driven to its absolute limits was fun and inspiring. And that's a huge message Initial D drives home. You don't need all the power in the world to have fun, and there really is something to be said about driving a slow car fast. Because here's the thing, the fundamental problem with having a fast car is that by the time you put your foot down and start to have fun, you've already broken every law in your state, and the cops are literally waiting at your door because they heard your screamer pipe 5 blocks away. A lot of people like to say it's copium, but you can genuinely have just as much fun in a car like a Toyota 86 as you can in an M3. I mean, I've got plenty of first-hand experience with both slow and fast cars, but we'll talk about what I drive later. So you gotta watch till the very end if you want to find out. This philosophy of the underdog and driving slow cars fast gives Initial D something I've only ever seen in one other niche sports anime, and that is Soul. The only other anime I've seen that in is Hajime no Ippo. You can really see the parallels between these two series as well. They both make you fall in love with the art of their respective sport, whether that be boxing or drifting. Each series also has its uniquely skilled protagonists with its group of wacky friends, some being more veteran in the sport than others, but maybe not as good as our protagonists. And how can I forget, each series treats their female cast and relationships horribly. But at least Takumi had more development with Natsuki in the first 3 seasons than Ippo has had with Kumi in over 1400 chapters. But the fact their relationship was interesting almost makes how things play out by stage 4 all the more frustrating. But we'll get there in due time. I want to take this opportunity to make one thing extremely clear. While Initial D is fucking cool and makes you just want to get in your car, slam some Euro beats and drive the fuck out of it, I have to say with my full chest, don't be stupid. I know, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but it's all fun and games until someone dies. At the end of the day, you are not Takumi, and you are not going to nail every single corner at top speed, banging it off the limiter in heavy downpour. You're going to kill yourself. I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't tell you to have a little bit of fun here and there, okay? And also, I did do some pretty stupid stuff back when I was 17 compared to what I do now. But seriously, if there's one thing you take from this video, just think. There's a time and place. So be super careful about where and when you decide to fuck around. This is especially important if you have passengers in your car. The thrill's exhilarating, I get it, I really do, but it's not worth it. Trust me. Your missus will be far more impressed with you doing donuts in a completely abandoned parking lot with no one for miles, or gunning it in a wide open space with no other cars around either, because she'll actually feel safe. So pick your battles and don't be a dickhead. With all that being said, sure, I am still guilty of occasionally giving my car a bit of a squirt when you see some kids on the side of the road doing this, because it puts a smile on their faces and we all know what it's like being that kid, right? But again, only if it's safe to do so. Sometimes it's late at night and you're pulling out of a Macca's onto a wide empty street with literally no one around and no one to injure. Sure, give it a little. You can make a kid's day. But other times, you gotta let him down, and that's just a part of being an adult. Now, back to our hectic drift anime. Takumi cannot stop racking up W's, beating Shingo in his Honda Civic in a duct tape death match. This is insane, don't try this. He wins his first race on a course outside of Akina Pass against Mako and Sayuki in their Salady, a 180SX with an S13 front end. He manages to win by following them in the first half and then emulating the way they take corners. He absolutely embarrasses Kenta in his S14, and finally, in the last race of the season, Takumi takes on the looming threat that's been in the background the whole time. The guy who's had a keen eye on his driving, taking tabs on all of his races and his abilities. He's up against the man who has never lost a race, the White Comet of Akagi, Ryosuke Takahashi. And this really is a season finale if I've ever seen one. It's tension-filled, action-packed, and overall just a great race. Before the race even starts, it's noted that Ryosuke detunes his FC RX-7, further leaning into that philosophy from the show of more power not always being better. Once the race starts, Ryosuke lets Takumi take the lead to monitor his driving and copy his technique, trying to see how far he's come and just what makes him so damn quick down Akina Pass. He notices previous flaws like Takumi's overbearing countersteer being corrected. One thing Takumi's never experienced until now is the overwhelming pressure of someone like Ryosuke on his tail. And for the first time, he is worried he's going to lose. This pressure causes Takumi to drive a little faster than normal, putting extra pressure on his tires, which unfortunately at the wrong moment results in some understeer, letting Ryosuke get ahead. It's over. It's Jova. It's go Jova even. Takumi is finished. There is no way he can recover from this until Ryosuke suffers the same problem. Not accounting for his own excess tire stress after copying Takumi's technique for the first half of the race, he faces some serious understeer going into the final corner, allowing Takumi to take the inside line and coming out ahead, winning the race and setting a new course record over 10 seconds faster than the previous. But even still, my humble king Takumi tells Ryosuke he doesn't consider himself faster and paints him winning as a fluke, and thus ending stage 1. We get a bunch of other races between other characters throughout this season which really go to flesh out this world, making it feel all the more lived in and driving this rivalry between all the races we've seen thus far. Each racer has their own style, advantages, shortcomings, and every single battle is fun to watch. But they're also spread between a whole bunch of slice of life moments too, which, wouldn't you know it, is actually very important. Stage 2 gets a massive CG upgrade for the races, but the art style does change a little bit. While it's still great, it does lose that classic 90s anime hot blur kind of look that stage 1 had. You know what I mean? How it kind of looks like this? This same style can be found in like the start of Hajime no Ippo as well. I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure what this style is called or why it has that effect. Maybe it has something to do with it being 480p. Maybe it has something to do with the fact it was supposed to be watched on a CRT TV. I don't really know, but I can't really find any answers by Googling why does 90s anime look blurry, or why does 90s anime look warm and fuzzy. That's the only words I can really think of to describe it. But I'm going to go off on a limb and say it was a deliberate art direction choice though. And I've got two main points of reference for this. One is another 90s anime known as Zoid's Chaotic Century, which I've talked a bunch about, that definitely doesn't have this same hot glowy neon, maybe you'd call it, effects that stage 1 had. And also, by the time we get around to stage 3, that original art style actually comes back. So if my theory is correct, then it is the case that it was deliberate. I really think they should have kept that season 1 style throughout. It makes everything feel so much more real and alive. I don't know what it is about it, but that style just makes everything feel a little bit more homey. Really driving that Anemoia, you know? I would love to know what you think though. Which stage of Initial D do you think had the best art style? Anywho, stage 2 has some new tough guys on the block wreaking havoc. A street racing team called Emperor, made up of Evos and Evos only, are parading through the Gunma prefecture, taking out every racing team in their path, including some of our old buddies from the Night Kids like Takeshi in his R32. So of course, time for Takumi to put them in their place. He races Emperor's second-hand man Seiji and narrowly beats him in the final corner on Akina Pass, gaining the inside after Seiji starts to understeer. Similarly to his victory against Ryosuke, Takumi doesn't consider this a win at all, realizing if they were to race on literally any other course, he would have lost to the Evo. Emperor's main man Kyoichi later on approaches Takumi, wanting to set the record straight before he faces the man he's really after, which is Ryosuke. He proposes they race on a different course and is very keen to show Takumi up and prove that the 8.6 is just an inferior machine. Despite not feeling very accomplished in his last victory, Takumi has no interest in another race and actually just turns him down. His justification is that he doesn't want to take the spotlight off Ryosuke and his race later on. But this is where our story takes a turn. Remember how I was saying up until stage 3 we get this nice blend of slice of life? Well, here is where some of our drama starts to spur. Someone leaves a note in Takumi's locker at school, essentially telling him that Natsuki is someone's sugar baby, or some old guy's IRL Discord kitten for you fucking nerds out there. He disregards it at the time, but later he gets an anonymous call telling him to head to a certain car park for proof. Now in the anime, it's a bit less drastic because it's the parking lot for a restaurant, but in the manga, it's a hotel. So he goes, and what does he find? His girlfriend, hand in hand, walking back to some old guy's Mercedes. Ouch. This especially hurts that little bit more in the manga because, well, we all know what they were there for. Understandably, this puts Takumi in a fit of rage and he decides to take a drive to clear his head, making his way to Akagi. He finds Kyoichi and his gang there doing practice runs of the course and chooses then and there to take him up on his offer. In this race, Takumi pushes the 8.6 to its absolute limits, trying to keep up with the Evo, and drives super aggressively after just finding out what his girlfriend was up to. But unfortunately, all that pressure caught up to him and his car, ending the race with a blown motor, which is already bad enough, but when you look at it symbolically, it's even worse. My man just had his heart broken, and now the heart of his car is broken with him. It was just one of those days where nothing went his way. Kyoichi circles back to check on him and then basically says,
"You never had me. You never had your car,"
and drives the fuck off. Fortunately enough, Bunta knew the 8.6 was a ticking time bomb and has prepared a tow truck for a time just like this. So after hearing what happened, he arrives to pick up Takumi relatively quickly as far as we're aware. And it just hurts, man. Bro was on the verge of tears. For a kid who had absolutely no clue about cars or what an 8.6 even was a season ago, to now being in despair about his precious 8.6, it's such a beautifully gradual progression. And now, it's all been stripped away. This is a pain I and many car enthusiasts might relate to an extent. There's been a couple of times in my teenage years where I happened to see my Hawkeye on the back of a tow truck, twice from a blown radiator, even though I was meticulously servicing that thing, and once from a night where I might have been driving a bit too hard in the rain, got into a bit of a kerfuffle, and bent my passenger side lower control arm. In case you didn't know, cars and gutters generally don't mix. Now, I'm not trying to romanticize this or tell you should go and get in an accident for the plot, but weirdly enough, I do believe getting in a relatively harmless, yet tow requiring accident did teach me a pretty good lesson and got me to respect the road a lot more than I used to. I feel like if that didn't happen and I wasn't stripped away from my car for over a week or so as a teenager waiting for a new lower control arm to come in, I'd probably still be driving like a... On the drive home, Takumi tells his dad he's saved up a good chunk of change and he's more than happy to pay for the repairs of the car. To which Bunta tells him he actually has a lot more money in savings than he thinks, as he's actually been putting aside money from every single one of his tofu runs set aside for college or whatever the hell after he graduates high school. But the thing is, the engine's gone and no amount of money is going to fix it. This leaves Takumi in shambles as he's worried the car is going to feel completely different after an engine swap, which is very true. Plus, his dad spent so long building and fine-tuning that car, so he feels this heavy burden for being the one to destroy it. He pleads for them to at least try and fix it until Bunta says something so simple but so important. It's not your fault. A few episodes go by and we get more slice of life things, and it's a little bit depressing seeing Takumi without his car. But soon enough, the 86 is back. New motor, bucket seat and all. But there's one major problem. It feels slow. This problem comes to a head when Takumi meets a fellow 86 driver, Wataru. He's introduced after Itsuki has a little run-in with his sister. They develop a relationship that of course goes nowhere, so don't even try getting a little bit invested in it. But what's interesting is Wataru knows quite a bit about cars. So when he pops the hood, he knows exactly what he's looking at. Takumi is confused as all hell. Wataru thinks Takumi is messing with him, which all leads to this massive miscommunication until finally he believes that Takumi genuinely has no clue about engines. After going for a drive with Takumi, Wataru figures it out. This new engine can rev far higher than the old one, meaning Takumi's tachometer is way out of whack and is shifting far too soon, which explains why it feels so damn slow. This is something Bunta never told Takumi. It's something he wanted him to realize himself. He sees his son has a vested interest in cars he hasn't fully expressed yet, and he wants him to be curious and go out and learn this stuff before he's just given the answer. And his idea works. Takumi was already heading down this path, but now he's invested. He managed to obtain a new tachometer as well as a bunch of other goodies that his dad had already ordered thanks to his gas station buddies and boss who knows Bunta. And they go on and have a lot of fun, and Takumi's learning all these new things from his friends, trying to really discover what this new engine is actually capable of. Thanks to a lovely Reddit thread started by Okuwa Dogedesu, I can confirm Bunta fitted the 86 with a twin cam 20 valve 4AG TRD engine, which is a fancy way of saying a Toyota racing motor. This Reddit user also pointed out that the one and only famous drift king Keiichi Tsuchiya did at one point run a TRD 4AG in his own 86. What's even more interesting is that Keiichi Tsuchiya is actually a canonical character in the Initial D universe and canonically an old friend of Bunta's. The two even have a phone conversation all the way back in stage 1. Putting the pieces together, I like to believe that Bunta purchased this engine directly off his old friend, explaining how he managed to get his hands on an engine that, as Wataru explains, is something you can't just buy with money, apparently. For a bit of fun, just because this engine kind of reminds me of the way my car drives, and if you were still wondering what I drive, I'll tell you my car's naturally aspirated and becomes a completely different car after around 4,000 RPMs. At around 3,800, the secondary air valve will open and it will absolutely blow your socks off. But anything under that, and you can just drive it like any other car. It'll feel like a Camry. Now, back to our plot. Takumi accepts a challenge to race Wataru, and just beforehand, finally finds out from his dad that this engine can be pushed to 11,000 RPM. With that info in hand, he heads out to Wataru's home course for the final battle of Stage 2. It is an endurance run, 8.6 versus 8.6, where Takumi is slowly unraveling and learning more about his new engine, mastering it, and falling in love with the car all over again. The more he drives it, the more natural it feels, up until the point where eventually it becomes second nature again. The car starts to feel like an extension of his body. Man and machine coming to a mutual understanding to achieve a goal of driving to the fullest. I make it sound a lot more poetic than it actually is, but that is how the show just makes you feel, and that right there is the soul of Initial D. That'd also be a really poetic way to end the video, but I'm not done yet. To round this off, we've got one final stage to discuss before I feel the soul of this show dies. And that is stage 3, which is not only a great movie, but the best Christmas movie I've probably ever seen. For some context, during the B plot of stage 2, Takumi is a little bit cold to Natsuki after finding out what she's been doing behind his back. And finally, after she pushes him for an answer, he confronts her about it, leaving Natsuki to spiral, but eventually coming to the conclusion that she wants a real job, so to speak, which is a pretty interesting reality check for her character. As far back as episode 1, she never truly understood the value of money. Everything was given to her by her sugar daddy. So when she heard Istuki say it would take him a whole month of working full time just to make 120,000 yen, she was shocked. But now, rather than living in ignorance and in an attempt to gain some respect from Takumi, she takes up a job at a restaurant. This will be important later. In other news, Takumi's getting more invested in cars and how they work by the day, realizing if he wants to be a better driver, he needs to up his mechanical knowledge as well, meaning the seeds that his father planted are finally starting to sprout, which then leads us to Project D. Ryosuke meets up with Takumi to lay out his plan. He wants to gather the best drivers in the area and create a team that would race all over the region, conquering each mountain pass around, creating a legend before immediately disbanding. It does seem a little odd, but Ryosuke says he only has about a year to achieve this dream. This is because soon enough, he'll have to fully devote himself to finishing his doctorate. Takumi doesn't give him an answer straight away because right now he doubts himself and he has one loose end he needs to tie up. The only loss on his record and the guy that told him he'll need a better car than the 8.6 to beat him, Kyoichi Sudo in his Evo 3. As with most races in this series, it is intense and a joy to watch. Kyoichi's home course with all its twists and turns and autumn leaves everywhere is absolutely gorgeous. And in case you didn't notice, now in stage 3, we've actually gone back to the stage 1 art style I gushed over like a little bit back. But the cool thing about it is it's far more polished. It's almost like a blend of the best parts of stage 1 and stage 2 combined into one. In the end, Takumi had the balls to go head first into the final bridge of the course, forcing Kyoichi to back off, winning him the race. Because of this, he doesn't consider it a real victory, but is more than happy to hear Kyoichi eat his words, saying his 8.6 is a good car. After hearing about his victory, Keisuke also approaches Takumi, telling him that he should join Project D, but still he's not ready to give an answer. Then we enter Kai Koshigawa, the son of an old rival of Bunta, who also just found out about an 8.6 defeating Kyoichi at Airo Azaka. Kai considered that course his to conquer. He's practiced it endlessly with his father and wanted to be the one to beat Kyoichi there. But since Takumi got to him first, he sets his sights on him. The two race the course, and just like Takumi's gutter drift at Akina, Kai has his own unfair advantage here. But even still, he doesn't have an air of arrogance about him, which is something that makes this race so important thematically. Up until this point, everyone underestimated the 8.6 and Takumi was the one to humble them. But that can only happen and be exciting for so long. He can't be the underdog forever. Even Ryosuke, who recognized him as a threat, still underestimated him and his 8.6's abilities. But the first person who truly saw Takumi as a threat was Kai. He hears the rumors, he knows he took out Kyoichi, and he knows his father has a history with Bunta, putting a lot of expectations on his shoulders, which all comes to a head when his father tells him to let Takumi take the lead. He argues back, saying, of course, if you let someone who may be fast to get ahead of you, you'll lose. He genuinely believes Takumi might be faster than him here and he might lose this race. And because of how well Takumi can adapt to his conditions, copying the hairpin drop and finding a perfect corner to perform a gutter drift just like on Akina Pass, he takes the W. After the battle and during stage 4 a bit later on, people do still underestimate the 8-6. I mean, at the end of the day, it is an 8-6. But at this point, he has the clout of Project D and Ryosuke Takahashi behind him. So he isn't truly an underdog anymore. And when our protagonist stops being an underdog, things get a little bit less interesting. You see the same thing happen with Naruto. Throughout the whole series up until pretty much the very end, he is the underdog in nearly every fight he takes on. No matter how strong he gets, even up until the very end, he needs his friends to take on, not Madara, it's Otsutsuki chick. I already forgot her name. She's that unmemorable. But by the time Boruto comes around, he's reached his final goal of becoming the Hokage. His skills are no longer up for debate. And sure, there's a novelty in seeing him dunk on people, but that kind of wears off after a while. And what's almost worse is when he loses. Because then you hear all the complaints. Oh, they nerfed Naruto. Oh, they nerfed Sasuke. And while it is annoying, the complaints do kind of have some merit because they do come from all of these preconceived notions that the original Naruto series built up. And I think the same thing applies here, where Initial D really brought up Takumi throughout these 3 seasons to become a great racer. Clearly he hasn't reached the top yet, but he's reached a ceiling where he probably can't get any better on his own, which is why him racing under Ryosuke does make sense, so he can continue to better himself. And he does just that. Ryosuke wants to give him that guidance and take him to the next level. And it works. Takumi does improve, but at the cost of the show in general just not being that engaging. The way stage 4 end up pans out would be the equivalent of, spoilers ahead, in Hajime no Ippo, after Ippo becomes the Japanese champion, he left the Kamigawa boxing gym to go train under Miyata on a quest to become the world champion. But then Miyata also semi-retires so he can exclusively coach Ippo and Sendo, and in every single boxing match either of the two has, Miyata would commentate over the whole thing, acting like he knew exactly how the match would pan out from the very get-go. And that just wouldn't be great. We'd lose that relationship between Kamigawa and Ippo, and that is just one huge part of what makes the series so special. Which is why I think this point in Initial D would have been the perfect opportunity for Takumi to be mentored further by his father, which as a byproduct could have given us a far deeper look into his character, their relationship, and maybe even a race between the two that we never got. The door to that reality is even opened up in this very movie. Takumi picks up Natsuki one afternoon to hash things out after things got real awkward last season. She makes it clear she broke things off with the guy in the Benz and that she really likes Takumi and wants to be with him. He doesn't give her an answer on that as he is struggling to cope with what just happened. He can't just let it go. But in their talks, the topic of Christmas comes up and she asks if Takumi has any Christmas plans, to which he says him and his dad never really celebrated it. So, on Christmas Eve, Natsuki decides to show up at the tofu shop to surprise him. But he's not there yet, so she waits inside with Bunta and sets up this little Christmas tree with some cute handmade ornaments like one of an 8-6 that she made for Takumi. And then surprises him when he finally gets home. It's cute, Natsuki's in there with the family, and like I said, this is the perfect gateway to develop that relationship between even the 3 of them further, but it doesn't go anywhere. This also means we can officially now call Initial D Stage 3 a Christmas movie. A little later, around New Year's, Natsuki is approached by an ex at her new job and is pressured to get in his car. At that point, he begins to act even creepier than he already was, abducting her and taking her out to Lake Akina, then attempting to sexually assault her. While trying to run, Natsuki, luckily enough, manages to make a call to Takumi for help, and so he drifts through the snow like a Japanese Santa Claus to save the day, and after he does, he finally confesses to Natsuki that he likes her too. We skip to their graduation, and Takumi confides in her that he's finally realized his dream. He likes to drive and wants to be faster than anyone else, but he's decided that he wants to become a pro racer, far removed from the no direction in his life NPC we saw at the start of the series. Natsuki is envious and proud of Takumi, but she wants to move to Tokyo, and Takumi wants to remain in Gunma. So the two go their separate ways. And this is what kind of gets me. Alright? Tokyo Station, for example, is about an hour and a half from Shibukawa, which is fuck all. My brother, that isn't even a long distance relationship. Maybe I've just got a warped sense of scale, as I live in a country where you can drive 13 hours west of Sydney and still be in the same state. But like an hour and a half used to be my commute to work one way. So a couple of years back, I used to do the equivalent of Shibukawa to Tokyo and back 5 days a week. Now sure, that fucking sucked because it was 5 days a week, but it'd be super easy for either of them to make that trip, well, I don't know, once a week to spend every weekend together or something like that. I know, I'm complaining about a relationship developed in a racing anime. And while it certainly isn't the best relationship in fiction out there by any stretch, it was an important part of Takumi's character and pretty interesting to the story. And the fact it's just dropped and we never see Natsuki in any substantial way again going into and after stage 4 is just really disappointing. Not only that, even all of our mates from the gas station just kind of get left in the dust from this point on. All of that drama and development between these characters is just shoved down the drain. And that is where I feel Initial D loses its soul. Now, I just want to make it clear that I don't dislike the latter half of Initial D. I enjoyed the entire series as a whole, but Project D was just missing that soul the first 3 stages had. And if you're someone who doesn't give a flying fuck about the aesthetic of the show or the character development or the pacing or any of these other deeper things and just care about the cars, then more power to you. But even if that is the case, I can't help but think the latter half is held back by a lot of yapping. Not to say the first 3 stages didn't have yapping, but when you take away all the other elements those 3 stages had that gave the series its soul, the yapping just starts to stand out way more towards the end, at least to me. So I've got nothing left to say about stage 4 and beyond, but I do have something left to say about Anemoia. That's right, I told you we'd come back to this. Throughout Initial D, we see a lot of really cool cars and a lot of really young people driving them. I mean, our protagonist Takumi and his friend Istuki are both in high school, and everyone else racing are around a similar age, like early 20s at most. And they're out there fucking around in RX-7s, GTRs and Evos, which just seems like an absolute dream. A lot of people these days feel like they've been priced out of fun cars, and to a large extent it is pretty true. Anything that's relatively fun to drive has recently skyrocketed in price, leaving young people with not many options. And it's not like I'm talking about rare or fast cars either. Want a 90s Civic? You're looking at 10 to 15k for some really mediocre examples, nearly 20k for a clapped out high kilometer VTIR, and approaching, sometimes even exceeding 40,000 Australian dollary dues for a Type R. A 90s Civic Type R. How about a little old NA MX-5? 12 to 15k for the most high kilometer clapped out Miatas I've ever seen. Maybe you wanted something a little cooler though. Something with a turbo? $25,000 for a gutted S13. Don't even try looking at how much a clean and running one is. What about an S15? One of my dream cars I had wished I bought like 8 years ago when I'd first got my license, and they were around 10 grand. But I wasn't able to because my parents refused to let me buy a 2-door drift missile for my first car. $35,000 for a stupidly high kilometer, banged up to shit, faded paint example. What about an R32 like Takeshi? $70,000 and up. What about some RX-7s like the Takahashi brothers? 30 to 40 grand for an FC and 60,000 and up for any FD. And as much as I love my Americans out there, oh, you're really eating up the cars, aren't you? Now that a lot of these old JDM cars are approaching 25 years old, they're slowly becoming legal to import in the States, driving up the prices to astronomical levels when they were already driving up because of COVID. For example, S15s are slowly becoming legal in America, and that is part of the reason they're skyrocketing. Other examples are things like R34 GTTs. The ones that aren't actually GTRs, some of them are coming 4 doors just because that was a thing back then. They are skyrocketing in price too. I remember back when I first got my license, similar to a Sylvia, you could have got an R34 GTT for like 8, 7, maybe even 6 grand if you were lucky and it had higher kilometers, like close to 200,000. Now, I don't even want to know. I haven't looked. I just saw TJ Hunt buy like 3 and they're not going to be fucking cheap anymore. The youth of today have been well and truly priced out of the 90s and 2000 cars they grew up with before they ever even had a chance to drive or buy them. This is even more true here in Australia, as many states have power to weight ratio laws, not letting people drive anything faster than a Subaru Liberty until they're 20 years old and get their full license. That's right, you aren't even allowed to drive a WRX until you're 20 because that's a lighter chassis than the Liberty, thus making it a faster power to weight ratio. Now, considering what I said earlier about not being stupid on the road, you might think that I agree with these laws, and to an extent, sure, they're a bit short-sighted and there are actually a lot of loopholes to get cars you probably shouldn't have. Like, I'm pretty sure P-platers can drive Ford Raptors. They're a massive car that are still quite quick and probably shouldn't be driven by someone inexperienced. And if my Hawkeye was a WRX or STI rather than just a base model Impreza, I probably would have gotten in a lot more trouble. And chucking a 17-year-old unsupervised in a 300 kilowatt Maloo ute that absolutely loves to whip its empty tail end out is a recipe for disaster. But outside of the law, it does just seem like a lot of us were born at the wrong time. Too late to buy a cheap home where we grew up, and to rub salt in the wound, also too late to buy a cheap, fun 90s Japanese car to fuck around with like our older cousins used to do. Like, seriously, my cousin had an S14 back in his teenage years that he bought for like 7k, and then he sold it a couple of years later for about 7k. Like, I am sick, and bro could have made so much money if he kept that. If I could find an S14 rolling shell for that price, I would probably buy it for shits and gigs, but here we are. What is interesting though is a lot of these cars that have gained some serious value over the years aren't all necessarily fast. They're just fun. Maybe a lot of TikTok kids haven't quite got it yet, but a lot of people are starting to realize that there is some serious value in a true driver's car. So coming full circle to my point at the beginning, what is fast? I truly believe fast is a feeling you get in your chest when you push that throttle, when you turn that wheel, when you take that corner. That is what fast is. And I feel as though maturing is realizing that you don't need all the horsepower in the world to have fun. For the longest time, I thought I needed something more. I drove my NA Hawkeye Impreza for 7 years, craving more power. But now that I've got twice the motor and triple the power, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love it and it puts a smile on my face every day, I've realized I never really needed it. If you're playing along, I'll now reveal what I drive. It's a Japanese imported 2008 Lexus ISF, and it's probably going to be my forever car. I genuinely can't see a point where I'm ever going to want to sell this thing. It's tame, under 4,000 RPMs, and if I ever feel the urge to put my foot down, I've got a V8 under the hood that'll comfortably just throw me in the back of my seat. But the thing is, I still had just as much fun in my teenage years driving my Subaru. It's just that things have changed. Everyone has different lives and different priorities, and what makes a daily is different for all of them. Myself, I'm hoping to have kids in the not so distant future. So while I had to compromise on a manual transmission, the ISF ticked every single other one of my boxes. And I think that's another key step to maturing as a car person. It really doesn't matter what you drive.